Hey, what's going on guys, Chris here, and I jumped out of a burning plane the other day, you know, in Battlefield 1, not in real life of course, and I whipped out the old C96 carbine, touched down right in the middle of a contested objective point, and then went to take over that objective by wiping out a squad of enemies chilling in the area. And that got me thinking, why are these tanker pilot weapons so exclusive to the tanker pilot class? I mean, I know they're not exactly the most powerful things in the world, and they don't really offer many statistical advantages over the primary weapons for the other classes, but sometimes it'd be nice to just be able to use some of them without having to bail out of a vehicle in a frantic last resort effort to stay alive first, which usually doesn't end well in most cases anyway. Now, with the inclusion of the new M1917 trench carbine for the assault class in the Turning Tides DLC, this made me think even more about this topic, in the sense that the M1917 actually functions in a pretty similar way to a lot of the tanker pilot guns, which all essentially play out like beefed up sidearms. There's quite a lot of weapons in the game just not being used, because of the fact that they're restricted to those vehicle classes. In fact, a lot of people who don't really like to play very much in tanks and planes probably don't even know they exist, which is a shame, because there's actually more guns in the game that people could and probably would be using if given the opportunity. Some of these guns include variants which have been added in the game's DLC, as the MLE 1903 Extended and the C93 Carbine were both added into the game via downloadable content drops in the past. And they even have their own challenges, which must be completed in order to unlock and equip them onto a tanker pilot loadout. But why would anyone want to try and unlock these guns if they're hardly ever given the option to actually use them? It just seems like a bit of a waste of time to go for them, and a bit of a waste of development time to make these guns, when more main kit weapons for other classes could have been created instead, that would have been used a hell of a lot more frequently. I'm fully aware that most of these weapons weren't exactly the most popular guns issued in the war, and a lot of them were given to artillery and vehicle crews as self-defense weapons, as opposed to being typical guns used up on the front lines, which ties in better with their placement in the game being accessible to vehicle loadouts only. But when you consider the amount of experimental weapons that everyone's running around with in the game, which were barely used in the war, if even used at all, then this makes the idea all the more plausible. Because at the end of the day, Battlefield 1 doesn't exactly depict an accurate picture of World War I, it's more of just a general theme. If we take a look at this chart over on BattlefieldTracker.com, which highlights weapon usability in Battlefield 1 over the course of a year, we can see that at the very top of the chart, the assault class takes the prize of having the most used weapons in the game, which is probably about right, with the majority of those most likely being Hellriegel users, or as I like to call them, noobs. But underneath this, the self-loading medic rifles come as the second most used weapons, followed very closely by the Scouts rifles, which is then followed by the supports machine guns, and then all of that other stuff like gadgets, grenades and melee weapons are all shown below these. Well, that little pinky purple looking line at the bottom of the graph shows us that the tanker pilot weapons aren't getting very much love at all, as they're basically the least used guns in the whole game, which isn't really a big surprise. Getting killed by a tanker pilot gun in Battlefield 1 is a pretty rare sight to see, and you're probably more likely to be killed by your own stupid mistakes, like a really badly thrown grenade or falling off a cliff, than you are with something like the P08 artillery. This is all down to them only being accessible if you bail out of a vehicle, so you're going to have to waste a perfectly good plane or tank, or you're going to have to jump out at the last second to avoid getting killed by an attacking enemy, who will still usually kill you as you jump out anyway. So I've been thinking about ways in which these guns could be better used and actually see some action in the game. And of course, one idea that's been circling around on the web for a while now is the thought of making these tanker pilot guns all-kit weapons. All-kit secondary weapons are already in the game, as we can choose to equip some of them, like the M1911, P08 pistol, and MLE 1903 on pretty much any class we want. So the idea of tanker pilot weapons crossing over to the other classes as all-kit primary guns might not be such a crazy idea after all. Now, I know what you're thinking. The idea of having a scout player running around with a from-and-stop auto could be a recipe for disaster. The scout could use the spotting flares on flags to pinpoint their enemies' locations, and essentially hunt down all of those little red dots one by one, giving the scout player a nice combination of CQC power and awareness. But you've got to remember that the pilot class already has access to spotting flares, so they can technically already do this. They just need to hop out of the plane first. And although some of the tanker pilot guns like the from-and-stop auto and sawed-off shotgun can be really dangerous weapons to be up against, they're still not as powerful as the other primary weapons used by the main classes. The Automatico and Model 1900 are both quite similar to these guns, but they both have greater benefits, and the idea that these slightly weaker guns could be used as all-kit weapons for any desired class, along with the tankers and pilots, which they'd also be used on, then this would open up a whole new variety of weapon choices and loadout options to fit players' needs, combining the gadgets they want with a slightly less powerful but still completely effective weapon as a trade-off, giving us more guns to play around with and actually make them feel as though they're part of the game, rather than just a plan B option for a class that doesn't really need them. If we go back to the good old days of Battlefields 3 and 4, there was a huge selection of all-kit weapons ranging from shotguns, DMRs to PDWs, all kinds of guns that could be equipped on any class we desired, most of which were often considered to be slightly underpowered when compared to the class-specific guns like the assault rifles and heavier LMGs. Because these tanker-pilot weapons sort of bridged the gap between primary and secondary guns, they probably wouldn't really mess with the whole balancing of the game, especially if they were all kept as primary weapons, and in a way this would be pretty similar to the all-kit weapons in some of the other older games. They obviously shouldn't be put into the secondary weapon slots, as I'm pretty sure there'd be no other reason to use any other pistol or sidearm over these guns, which are all generally more powerful or more accurate, and I suppose they'd be a bit too overpowered to be put with the other secondary weapons. As a counter-argument to having the tanker pilot weapons as all-kit guns could be that this idea would make the classes less important and specific, as giving a scout player weapons which can perform well in CQC sort of goes against the fact that the scout class was designed for long-range battles. And although it'd give the player more options to pick from, it might make roles less important, which isn't exactly the best way to promote team play. Because Battlefield is a game which focuses more so on having weapons and gadgets tied to specific classes, giving players more of a sense of importance to their team, having all-kit weapons still might not be the best idea, even if it would give those tanker pilot guns more of a chance to be used. Though I guess if they weren't to be used on all kits as primary weapons, then maybe they could be separated into the different main classes, offering a more limited but still wider selection of weapons to equip for each class, perhaps adding the likes of the Thromostop and sawed-off shotgun to the assault class, and the carbine type weapons to the medic class for example. Another totally different idea, which would include those tanker pilot weapons a bit more, could be to give the players who are choosing to spawn into an allied vehicle the option to be able to equip those weapons on their loadouts, if they want to. Or even give them the option to spawn into that allied vehicle with a tanker or pilot loadout, just like the driver does. Most players probably wouldn't do this, but at least it'd give the ones who wanted to the choice. And this would definitely make those guns more accessible to the average player, as it means you wouldn't need to feel bad about abandoning a vehicle. Though perhaps another idea, which would give players the choice to use these tanker pilot weapons all the time whenever they want to, without them being all kit guns, could be to create a new class alongside the other main classes, and allow people to spawn in with the same loadout options as tankers and pilots, including their weapons. Maybe as a possibility, this main class could have a slight increase to health or armour, just like the cavalry class does, and this would probably help to balance it out a bit and encourage players to use it more. Maybe they shouldn't be given quite as much health as the cavalry class, only a little bit, bumping it up to about 130 HP, just to allow the user to withstand an extra bullet or so, and to compensate for the weapons in that class being slightly weaker to the other primaries on offer. It's probably not going to happen, but it's just another way of how those weapons could be better implemented into the game, and make them more popular. Thinking forwards to the future on how DICE is looking to develop weapon damage, and how SMGs and LMGs could potentially be getting buffs further down the line to reduce kill times, some of the weapons, such as the POA artillery, actually share the same cartridges to some of the assault's primary weapons like the MP18, which could likely be getting buffed. If this cartridge buff was to carry over to the POA artillery, thus allowing it to kill in one less bullet, and if the other tanker pilot weapons also got damage increases too, along with the SMGs and LMGs, then these weapons could still potentially be pretty good, with faster times to kill. So all in all, whatever does and doesn't happen in Battlefield 1's future, I think it'd be nice to see more of these tanker pilot weapons. And although they're not considered to be very powerful, and in a lot of people's eyes, making them all kit weapons or making them more accessible would be pointless, I still think a lot of players would want to mess around with them regardless, as they're still effective killing machines in the right hands. And a lack of power didn't deter people from using the PDWs in the older Battlefield games, so it probably wouldn't deter them from doing the same this time around in Battlefield 1. So anyway guys, what do you think about those tanker pilot weapons? Do you reckon they should be all kit guns? Do you think there should be another class which allows us to use them as infantry alongside the other classes? Let me know your ideas and thoughts down below in the comments. But that's all I've got for you in this one. So give me a like if you enjoyed the video or found it interesting, and subscribe to see all of my other Battlefield 1 videos, old, new and coming soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.